Huawei's rise and fall, from telecoms to US blacklist. In 1987, in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Shenzhen, China, a 43-year-old former People's Liberation Army engineer named Ren Zhengfei scraped together 21,000 yuan, roughly $5,600 at the time, to start what would become one of the world's most powerful and controversial technology companies. Ren had just been laid off from a state-owned enterprise and was facing personal turmoil, including a divorce that left him nearly broke. But this middle-aged father had a vision that would transform not just China's telecommunications industry, but the entire global landscape of technology and geopolitics. He called his company Huawei, which translates to China Achievement, and from that modest apartment, he began building what would become the world's largest telecommunications equipment manufacturer, serving over 3 billion people across 170 countries. Yet this remarkable success story would ultimately become a cautionary tale of how quickly an empire can crumble when it collides with the harsh realities of international politics and national security concerns. Ren Zhengfei's journey to entrepreneurship was anything but conventional for a future tech billionaire. Born in 1944 in rural Guizhou province, one of China's poorest regions, Ren grew up during some of the most turbulent periods in modern Chinese history, including the Great Famine and the Cultural Revolution. His father was a rural school principal who instilled in him a deep respect for education and hard work, values that would later shape Huawei's corporate culture. After studying engineering at the Chongqing Institute of Civil Engineering and Architecture, Ren joined the People's Liberation Army in 1974, where he spent 9 years working on military engineering projects and technology research. This military background would later fuel suspicions about Huawei's connections to the Chinese government and military, but it also gave Ren invaluable experience in large-scale project management and strategic thinking. When China began its economic reforms in the 1980s, millions of military personnel were demobilized, and Ren found himself working for a state-owned oil company in Shenzhen, the newly designated Special Economic Zone. However, after taking responsibility for a business decision that resulted in significant losses, Ren was essentially forced out of the company, leaving him unemployed and desperate at the age of 43. The early days of Huawei were a masterclass in bootstrapping and survival in one of the world's most competitive markets. With no venture capital or government backing initially, Ren started by reselling imported telecommunications equipment from Hong Kong companies to Chinese businesses hungry for modern technology. Shenzhen in 1987 was a frontier town, part of Deng Xiaoping's grand experiment in market capitalism, where entrepreneurs worked 18-hour days in sweltering heat with minimal infrastructure. Ren operated from that tiny apartment with just a few employees, often sleeping on the floor and eating instant noodles while trying to understand the complex world of telecommunications technology. The company's first major break came when they began reverse engineering foreign equipment, learning how digital switching systems worked by taking them apart and rebuilding them. This practice, while controversial in Western business circles, was common among Chinese companies and provided invaluable technical education. By 1990, Huawei had developed its first product, a digital telephone switch called the CNC08, which could compete with foreign imports at a fraction of the cost. The switch was not particularly sophisticated by international standards, but it worked reliably and cost 60% less than equivalent foreign products, making it attractive to price-sensitive Chinese telecom operators. Throughout the 1990s, Huawei transformed from a scrappy startup into a serious player in China's rapidly expanding telecommunications market, driven by Ren's relentless focus on research and development and his unconventional management philosophy. While most Chinese companies at the time focused on cheap manufacturing and quick profits, Ren made the bold decision to invest at least 10% of Huawei's revenue, and often much more, into research and development, a practice he maintained throughout the company's growth. By 1995, Huawei's revenues had reached $300 million, and the company employed over 200 people, many of them brilliant engineers recruited from China's top universities. Ren implemented what he called mattress culture, where engineers would sleep in the office on mattresses during intense development periods, working around the clock to meet impossible deadlines. This grueling work ethic, combined with generous profit-sharing programs that gave employees significant ownership stakes in the company, created an intensely loyal and motivated workforce. The company's early success coincided with China's massive telecommunications infrastructure boom, as the country connected hundreds of millions of people to phone networks for the first time. By 1998, Huawei had captured 40% of China's domestic market for telecommunications equipment, competing successfully against established international giants like Cisco, Nortel, and Alcatel. The new millennium marked Huawei's aggressive expansion into international markets, a move that would ultimately make it a global powerhouse but also plant the seeds of its future troubles. Ren recognized that China's domestic market, while enormous, would not be sufficient for Huawei to achieve his vision of becoming a world class technology company. The company's international expansion began in developing markets where established Western competitors were less entrenched and price sensitivity was high. Russia became Huawei's first major international success story when the company won a $38 million contract to build a national telecommunications network in 2000. This was followed by significant contracts in Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, and across Africa, where Huawei's combination of competitive pricing, reliable technology, and willingness to work in challenging environments made it an attractive partner for emerging economies. By 2005, Huawei's international revenues exceeded its domestic Chinese sales for the first time, and the company had established research and development centers in Bangalore, Stockholm, and Silicon Valley, recruiting top talent from around the world. The company's success was built on a simple but effective strategy: offer technology that was 80% as good as the market leaders at 50% of the price, while providing exceptional customer service and customization. Huawei's rise accelerated dramatically with the advent of 4G technology and the global smartphone revolution, positioning the company at the center of the most important technological transformation of the 21st century. In 2009, Huawei launched its consumer device division, initially focusing on mobile broadband devices and low cost smartphones for emerging markets. The company's breakthrough came with the development of its own semiconductor capabilities through its subsidiary HiSilicon, which began producing the Kirin series of mobile processors that could compete with chips from Qualcomm and MediaTek. By 2012, Huawei had become the world's largest telecommunications equipment manufacturer, surpassing Sweden's Ericsson, and was rapidly gaining ground in the smartphone market against Samsung and Apple. The company's success was built on massive investments in research and development. By 2018, Huawei was spending $15 billion annually on R&D, more than most countries' entire technology budgets. This investment paid off spectacularly. Huawei's smartphones, particularly the P and Mate series, earned critical acclaim for their camera technology and design, while the company's telecommunications equipment became essential infrastructure for mobile networks worldwide. By 2018, Huawei was serving 45 of the world's top 50 telecom operators and had shipped over 200 million smartphones, making it the world's second largest smartphone manufacturer behind Samsung. The company's dominance in 5G technology represented the pinnacle of Huawei's technological achievements and the ultimate validation of Ren Zhengfei's long-term vision, but it also marked the beginning of unprecedented scrutiny from Western governments. Huawei began investing in 5G research as early as 2009, years before most competitors understood the technology's potential, spending over $2 billion on 5G development before the first commercial networks were deployed. This early investment gave Huawei a commanding lead in 5G patents. The company held more than 400 5G patent families by 2019, more than any other company in the world. Huawei's 5G equipment was not only technically superior but also cost significantly less than competitors' offerings, making it attractive to telecom operators worldwide facing pressure to upgrade their networks while controlling costs. The company's 5G base stations consumed 20% less power than competitors' equipment while delivering superior performance, and Huawei could deploy 5G networks 30% faster than rivals. By 2019, Huawei had signed more than 60 commercial 5G contracts worldwide and shipped over 400,000 5G base stations. However, this technological leadership in a critical infrastructure technology that would underpin everything from autonomous vehicles to smart cities made Western governments increasingly nervous about potential security implications and Chinese government influence over global communications networks. The turning point in Huawei's fortunes came with the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, Ren Zhengfei's daughter and Huawei's chief financial officer, in Vancouver in December 2018, an event that transformed a technology company's success story into an international diplomatic crisis.
Ming was arrested on a U.S. extradition warrant related to allegations that Huawei had violated sanctions against Iran through a subsidiary company called Skycom, which prosecutors claimed was secretly controlled by Huawei despite public denials of any connection. The arrest sent shockwaves through the technology industry. It marked the beginning of an unprecedented escalation in tensions between the United States and China, with Huawei caught in the crossfire. The Chinese government's furious response, including the detention of two Canadian citizens widely seen as retaliation for Meng's arrest, demonstrated how thoroughly Huawei had become entangled with Chinese national interests and pride. For Ren Jingfei, the arrest was not just a business crisis, but a deeply personal tragedy. Meng was being groomed as his potential successor and represented the future of the company he had built from nothing. The incident crystallized growing American concerns about Huawei's relationship with the Chinese government and military, concerns that had been building for years as U.S. intelligence agencies warned about potential security risks in Huawei's equipment. The Trump administration's decision to place Huawei on the entity list in May 2019 represented the most severe sanctions ever imposed on a technology company and effectively cut Huawei off from the global supply chain that had enabled its rise. The entity list designation meant that American companies could no longer sell components, software, or technology to Huawei without special government licenses, a devastating blow for a company that relied heavily on American semiconductors, software, and other critical components. Google immediately suspended Huawei's Android license, meaning new Huawei smartphones could no longer access Google Play Store, Gmail, or other Google services that were essential for international customers. Major semiconductor companies including Intel, Qualcomm, and Broadcom stopped supplying Huawei, while ARM Holdings, the British company whose chip designs were used in virtually all smartphone processors, suspended its relationship with the Chinese giant. The impact was immediate and severe. Huawei's international smartphone sales plummeted as consumers avoided devices without Google services, while telecom operators worldwide began reconsidering their relationships with the company. The sanctions were later tightened further when the U.S. government restricted any company using American technology from selling to Huawei, effectively cutting off the company's access to advanced semiconductors manufactured by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the world's largest contract chip manufacturer. The collapse of Huawei's global ambitions demonstrated how quickly a technology empire could crumble when caught between competing superpowers, transforming one of the world's most successful companies into a cautionary tale about the intersection of business, technology, and geopolitics. Huawei's international smartphone market share dropped from 20% in 2019 to less than 10% by 2021, as the company was forced to sell its budget smartphone brand Honor and focus primarily on the Chinese domestic market where Google services were not essential. The company's telecommunications equipment business also suffered as countries including the United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, and India either banned Huawei equipment or severely restricted its use in their 5G networks, citing national security concerns. Huawei's revenue declined for the first time in its history in 2021, falling 29% to $99 billion as the full impact of the sanctions became clear. The company was forced to pivot away from its core telecommunications and smartphone businesses toward new areas like cloud computing, automotive technology, and enterprise services, essentially rebuilding itself while under unprecedented international pressure. Ren Jingfei, who had rarely given interviews during Huawei's rise, became a more public figure as he sought to defend his company's reputation and maintain employee morale during the crisis. The Huawei story represents one of the most dramatic corporate rise and fall narratives of the modern era, illustrating both the possibilities and perils of building a global technology empire in an increasingly fragmented world. From a 21,000 yuan investment in a Shenzhen apartment, Ren Jingfei built a company that at its peak employed 184,000 people worldwide, generated $123 billion in annual revenue, and held technology leadership in critical areas like 5G telecommunications and smartphone innovation. Huawei's success challenged Western assumptions about Chinese companies' ability to innovate rather than simply copy, and the company's collapse under U.S. sanctions marked a turning point in global technology competition that continues to shape international relations today. The rise and fall of Huawei also highlighted the increasingly strategic importance of technology companies in national security and economic competition, as governments worldwide grappled with the implications of allowing foreign companies to build critical infrastructure. For Ren Jingfei, now in his 70s, the transformation of his life life's work, from celebrated global success story to geopolitical flashpoint, represents a personal tragedy that mirrors the broader tensions between China's rise and America's determination to maintain technological leadership. The Huawei saga ultimately serves as a powerful reminder that in the modern world, no company, regardless of its technological achievements or global reach, can escape the gravity